Welcome to the Millionaire University podcast. I'm your host, Brien Gearin, back with you today. And on this edition of the MU Pod, I'm joined by Kurt Wilkin. He's the co-founder and CEO of HireBetter, a national recruiting firm working directly with leaders of high-growth companies to build game-changing teams. He also happens to be the author of Who Is Your Mike? It's a no BS guide to the types of people you'll meet on your entrepreneurial journey. And he also has his own podcast, the Unlocking Moves podcast, which has some pretty awesome episodes, a little spoof for that. And finally here, Kurt, I swear I'm going to let you talk, but I want to make sure we mention that you're also an investor of over 200 companies, an angel investor, over 200 companies that have a greater impact on the world at large. So, Kurt, heck of a story. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brien, I'm so pumped. I love hearing that little snippet. I've been around entrepreneurs my entire career, and I love the story and appreciate you having me here. Love what you're doing with Millionaire Podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this episode after we met a couple months ago. I mean, you've got your hands in so many different pots. I mean, heck, you got over 200 companies that you are an angel investor in. So, yeah, there's no telling how many entrepreneurs that you've affected in your career here. And then with your awesome book, it's a pleasure to have you on today. So some of the things we're going to talk about, a lot of what we're going to talk about are the archetypes that you spell out in Who Is Your Mike? And I'm really excited to get into that. But first, I want to provide some context and get a little origin story out of you for our listeners out there. How did you get into the entrepreneurial world? How did you find your success, become an author, a best-selling author? How did it all start?
Well, I'll tell you where it started, but let me start with where the entrepreneurial journey began. Like a lot of your listeners and people at Millionaire University, they probably started with losing their job or company going out of business or something like that. That's where my entrepreneurial journey started. I was working with a .com in the late 90s, and we went belly up, and I had a new wife and a young son, and so I had to do whatever I could to make ends meet. Started doing some consulting, and ultimately that led to a business that I grew to $20 million and ultimately sold. But before that, I did work at Ernst & Young, so I looked smart on paper. I wasn't very smart. Thankfully, I got lucky and I used my connections and got a job there. I went to Arkansas, University of Arkansas, and I grew up in South Louisiana. I live in Austin, Texas. So I've got redneck, coon-ass, and hillbilly in one beautiful package. And it's just been an amazing journey, just letting really life take me where it goes and seizing opportunities when I had the opportunities. That's why my podcast is called Unlocking Moves, because I think we all have one or two key unlocking moments that really change the trajectory of our career. And I want to help entrepreneurs discover when those opportunities may be in front of us so we can seize them and not sit lazily aside wishing good things could happen to us.
Yeah. Well, so what was the move that unlocked you getting into being a co-founder of HireBetter? I mean, that's different than a .com. It's different than Ernst & Young. How long have you been in business with HireBetter, and how'd you get there?
So I ended up buying HireBetter. So I sold my previous company, the Controller Group, that had grown to about $20 million in revenue. We sold it to Tatum, which is a national or international CFO firm. And I was there for a few years until I realized that I was unemployable. Mm-hmm. It's hard to be on the board of a company when you're also an employee of the same company. That's a whole couple of stories I could share over a few pops with you later. But as I was leaving there, I wanted to do something more impactful than just staffing. And so I fired off a Jerry Maguire letter, if you're familiar with, show me the money,
show me
right?
The money.
I fired off a letter saying, we're going to change the world, and here's how we're going to do it, and who's going to follow me, right, type of thing. And I spent a couple of years trying to figure out what that was going to be, trying to do something more impactful than just people. And by the way, being in the professional staffing business before, I wanted to do something different because people suck, right? Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for the candidates and the clients, it would be a great business. But then I realized I'm really good at people. I'm really good with working with entrepreneurs and helping them determine what they need to be successful. And I ended up buying HireBetter in 2011. And we believe that there's no more important thing for entrepreneurs to have other than capital and talent. Because with those two things, you can change your business model, you can reinvent the wheel, you can overcome Obamacare or COVID, whatever it is. And so we sunk our teeth into both investing with, you talked about me being an angel investor, and then HireBetter, helping people with the talent. And we spend our entire lives focusing on how we help entrepreneurs build next level teams. So that's the brief background on HireBetter.
Okay. And what are the types of companies that HireBetter helps? I'm sure there's probably some entrepreneurs listening to us now that might be in the stage of business where they might need people.
Yep. And look, the recruiting industry is all about finding people. What I determined is oftentimes we as entrepreneurs don't know what we need. And that's where the challenge comes for me. It's a puzzle. And so my book is called Who's Your Mike is all about helping entrepreneurs understand the types of employees that are on their team or that could be on their team. And what do we do when we encounter these types of employees? So for example, Mike is your good buddy. He joins you as your kind of back office mate doing your bookkeeping. You promote him to accountant. You ultimately promote him to controller and maybe even CFO because titles are cheap and he's your main finance guy. You look up and you're doing 20 million in revenue and now you've got real problems. You've got a real business. And Mike doesn't know what he's doing. He's working his ass off. He's trying his best. He just never done this before. So he's in over his head. He's swirling and he's struggling. So the question is, who's your Mike? Every entrepreneur either has a Mike or has had or will have a Mike. The only way to avoid a Mike is just to simply not grow. And so the book, the first chapter is about Mike, and there's other chapters with similar, I'll say, legacy employees. And then there's other chapters about people you kind of bring in to save the day. And what I found is these patterns repeat themselves over and over again with entrepreneurs. And as I tell you about more characters, eyes are gonna light up like, yeah, I've got one of those guys, or I knew one of those guys in your career.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into talking about some of these archetypes because I think that resonates deeply. Even with me as an entrepreneur, there's people I've worked with or they've been part of the team where they grow into their role, they have their skill, they grow into their role, and then when it comes time business-wise where there's something else that needs to get done or another role that needs to be filled, I think as humans and as entrepreneurs, we're comfortable with who we have. And, we like our bubble, right? It's, the biggest growth happens when you're uncomfortable, but it's so easy to try and stay comfortable. And then you start putting someone in a role that maybe is out of their bounds or it's not part of their skill set, but they're going to be a good soldier and be like, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. And then before you know it, no, they can't. They got what they're good at, and that's sometimes it.
Yeah, there's one of my characters is called Bounce Around Betty, and I've had that employee. Actually, she's still on my team, and she's doing a great job. But wherever I have a gap, I put Kelly, and in the book, we put Betty. Like where I need to have a problem in customer service, let Betty solve it. If I have a problem in sales, let's bring in Betty to try to solve it. And the deal is, Betty does a great job to solve the initial challenge because she's willing to roll up her sleeves and do whatever it takes. Now, the question is, as you want to go to the next level and implement the systems and processes and structure and all the stuff that next level companies need, Betty's never done this before, so she's going to struggle. Now, she could learn and do it, find ways to learn to do it. The challenge is if you have every part of your organization having people learn their way through, you're just going to learn a lot of lessons the hard way. And I would rather have a couple of key members of my team who've done this before so I can leverage their warts, their broken bones, the things that they had to learn along the way at previous companies so I can get there faster.
Well, and I think that's a thing that a lot of maybe hard-headed entrepreneurs, and I'm very guilty of that in the past as well, is you think that, we shouldn't take shortcuts. We need to do it the hard way because that's how it is and that's how you learn, da-da-da. But as you're going along in the world of business, like nobody cares about the hard knocks you're taking. You're going to always be taking some hard knocks, but the whole point is to start mitigating the amount of hard knocks you have to take by identifying your problems and then finding someone, it's like the book, The Who Not How, find your who, right? And it can help you shortcut. It can cut that timeline to success drastically. And it's one of those things where sometimes you don't see it till it's too late or the writing's on the wall and you might choose to ignore it.
I'll tell you what, man, give me that cheat code when you can. I will say that one thing that we talk a little bit about in the book, but I think is important for your listeners is you don't always have to bring in the big swinging, sales guy or the VP of ops or whatever it is. You might not be ready for that salary or for the time commitment, all that. But there's a great world of now in this fractional world, you can find a consultant or an advisor or a mentor who has the skill set that you're lacking. And that's where I would lean to go to some of your buddies who have done this before. And maybe you can't employ them because they've got their own dragons they're trying to slay, but you can bring them in and have them consult with you a couple of hours a week even, just to give you some ideas. So there's all levels of ways that you can handle this short of, paying $250,000 for the silver bullet, which often doesn't work.
Right. Well, and I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, again, myself included, you think that, well, the only solution to this is I've got to go hire someone, depending on what your business is, a W-2, or they got to be a contract. They got to be somebody who can do this thing. But gosh, I know, like you said, they're going to cost 250K a year. And I just don't have that. I don't have the revenue yet, or I don't have the cash flow yet. But I think it's one of those things where you got to be curious and you got to ask for help. Like you said, there's help out there at a fractional price. That's why that whole industry is called fractional, because they offer it at a price you can afford for the amount of time that costs. Or, not being afraid to look at freelancers or talking to professionals such as yourself, Kurt, who can help them identify, what, you think this is your problem, but from what you tell us, we think this actually might be your problem. And it just unlocks a flood of, oh crap, no way, I didn't think about that, right?
That's actually where I spend most of my time, is trying to uncover what you truly need versus what either you think you need, or what your YPO buddy said you need, or what your banker said you need, or somebody who you respect says you need, because oftentimes it's not the case. One of the other things we see a lot, Brian, is the flip side of the really expensive resource. Somebody wants you name the position, a salesperson that's going to be so strategic and set my vision and do all this stuff, but I want to pay them, 60 grand, 70 grand. And what we get for the low dollar is a tactician. If they're good, they're just very good at the tactics perhaps, and they don't really have the big picture thinking that you're going to want to be alongside you as you're trying to grow this thing. Now, again, if you don't want to grow, you don't have nearly as many challenges as the companies that are growing. But even 20% compounded year after year, your wheels are falling off.
Yeah, and it's a challenge that if you wait too long, now it's detrimental to the business, right? Like you're going to start losing customers or losing sales because, clients and customers aren't ding dongs, right? They can see when the infrastructure of the business is not well, right? And it's usually through the people that represent your business, your employees or your contractor, whoever is client facing. It becomes pretty obvious, and that's a recipe for disaster because nobody wants to work with a company that doesn't have their stuff together, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's painful. So when you're working with companies like this, I guess the number one thing that you identify in an entrepreneur, or I guess maybe which archetype from your book is the number one? I forget, you mentioned the mic, but there's a handful of other ones. What's the top one that comes to mind when these entrepreneurs come to you with struggles?
Well, let me say two things about the book first, and I'll just highlight that the book is not just about legacy employees that don't work, right? And there's always something good about those employees. So don't. My sister read the first chapter and she started crying. She says like, "Oh my gosh, I'm the Mike," and I'm like, "That's not the point." There's a few chapters, 5 chapters on legacy employees, and then I have an intermission, which is an advice chapter. So it's really good. That's probably the meat of the book, is really the advice and the stories that you hear. The next 3 chapters are what I call silver bullet hires. Like I want to bring in somebody from the outside to save the day because I'm tired of beating my head against the wall. And there's some things to look at as you're making these decisions, right? That may or may not work. And then there's a couple chapters around culture and building the team. And then there's a few chapters at the end about partnering with the right complement to you to really to build the company. But you asked me about some of the most prevalent chapters that we see. The chapter I haven't talked about yet is called Harry the Hustler. I know this one resonated with you when we talked earlier, and that is your kick-ass sales guy or gal that is very good at basically helping you build the business. You're probably pretty good at sales too, but this person is your number 2, and you hand them over everything and they kick. Well, now you're ready to grow, and you need to bring in a sales leader because you need multiple Harrys, right? And so Harry raises his hand and said, "Hey, I'm your guy. Make me the sales leader." Well, the reality is Harry's not a sales leader. He's not a sales manager. He's not a sales visionary. He's good at sales. And so what often happens is we promote Harry into that leadership role. And now we not only have a manager, we've also lost our best sales guy. And so that's just a challenge we see over and over again. It doesn't mean he couldn't do it. It just means be smart about it and maybe provide the tools and resources that he needs to be successful, perhaps with a fractional VP of sales that could be his coach or her coach, and help them build. I mean, we're bringing in CRMs, we're bringing in systems, we're bringing in processes that you've never had to deal with as an entrepreneurial company, and that's often overlooked.
So maybe I could see this from in a past agency life of mine. We made a hire kind of like this, or maybe this relates to the silver bullet hire as well, where we needed sales. We went out and we hired an industry veteran, solid track record. very good guy, but it didn't work out. And we poured money into this and just kept pouring money into it. Like it's kind of like the Family Guy episode where he's poking the guy and says, do math. And we're like, do sales. And it just didn't work. Who's to say it's, personal and business problem, like the offer wasn't there, whatever. But how do you, if you're in a company where you think you say you've got a great salesperson, they want that promotion, you need that promotion, how do you identify in them if they have those? Is that where you bring in the skilled help, or rather than just trust them to do it right? Like, how does the entrepreneur or the business owner know whether that person needs the help or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. And some of it depends on what the skill set of the entrepreneur is. So I'll just use me as an example because I think a lot of us learn better from stories. So I'll tell you my story. I am great at relationships and I can develop business. I can tell the story. I'm a pretty good listener. I can find how I can solve your problem. I suck as a salesperson. I know that sounds weird. I mean, I sell a lot of business, but it's because I don't sell. And so what I'm bad at is I'm bad at building the systems and infrastructure and all the stuff that goes into building a true sales organization. I know that. So I know that when I'm counseling Harry, that I'm going to be able to coach him and he's going to be able to watch me in action, but I'm not going to be able to truly manage him or help him do the things that I need him to do to get my company to the next level. So I know that. So I will go out and find somebody who I think can do that well, probably as an advisor at first, especially if I think Harry has the skills. And I might even have my friend assess them. Say, hey, talk to Harry. I think he's got the it factor. I know he can sell and he really wants this. I'm not 100% sure he's got the skills to do it. So can you help me, get to know him, take him to lunch, whatever. So I'll use resources around me to help determine if Harry has those capabilities.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Rely on the experts and kind of get their professional opinion. And it's one of those things where it's so easy as a business owner to just jump in and be like, oh, you want this? Sure. Yeah, I need the help. Let's go. But I think it's the old adage, hire slow, fire fast, right? It has a little bit of an impact here where it's promote slow or promote slower maybe, right? Or is it the opposite where maybe promote them fast and figure it out, or just maybe promote a little bit more safely?
Well, it's one of those things where it's hard to unring the bell. Mm-hmm. So once you promote him, it's hard to say I'm going to demote you now. So
that's true.
There's a lot of conversations I think that have to go into that. It depends on your relationship with Harry and your rapport and how much trust you have in each other. And you can say, hey, look, we need to get there fast. I don't want to set you up to fail. So here's what I want to do. Let's take this slow. We'll give you some responsibility without the title. We'll give you some compensation without the title. We'll maybe give you the title, but we might have to ratchet that back. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can skin it. In the book, I talk about the different compensation structures for cash. Maybe I can make him a partner. Maybe I can do equity. There's different things I could do that are meaningful to him that aren't a title and responsibilities. If I don't think he's got the capabilities, but I feel he's valuable, maybe I'll give him an equity slug so that he feels important, and he is important, but he's not my VP of sales.
Let's talk about the silver bullet hires that you mentioned before. Can you expound upon that? Tell us kind of exactly what you mean by the silver bullet hire, and how does an entrepreneur avoid that or maybe do that correctly? Is there a golden bullet hire?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the reason it's called the silver bullet for me is because many times I've sought that silver bullet that's going to make everything magical and everything's going to be solved. So many of my friends and clients are like, man, I just need a whatever, sales guy, ops guy, whatever it is, that's just going to come and solve my problems and I can go relax. It rarely works like you hope it works. It doesn't mean it can't work. And so one of the things I wanted to touch on is the sales leader we bring in from the outside as that silver bullet. In the book, I call this guy Pipeline Paul because he's always talking about this great pipeline that's going to matriculate and sales are going to happen. They never do. And so it's kind of written from a fun perspective, like, hey, this guy's not going to work out. But let me tell you a little bit about why. Even if he or she is a really good sales leader and a salesperson, oftentimes we as entrepreneurs want to bring in Brien as my sales leader and expect him to make it rain. Because I make it rain. I'm a good biz dev guy. But I'm a founder. I can make it rain without just with me because I understand the product so well and I understand what you're trying to solve so well. if I bring in somebody from the outside, rarely are they going to be able to sell the same way that I can. And so oftentimes they need sales collateral. Just it's something as simple as that. I don't need a sales deck that's going to, pump you full of about how my product's going to, win the day for you. But many salespeople need those sales materials, the collateral, the marketing collateral, the stories, the case studies, the client references. I have those in my head. Your sales guy from the outside doesn't have that history, and they're going to need that collateral for you. And somebody's got to build it. And many times we bring them in and say, go sell. And then 90 days later, they're like, hey, you're not selling, get the hell out of here. And really, we didn't set them up for success by giving them the tools that they need to be successful. Does that make sense? We didn't give them the tools.
Yeah, I think the majority of the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but it comes back to the fact that the silver bullet hire, who probably does have all the talent you need them to have, but you failed in setting them up for success, whether it's they didn't have the right SOPs or they, and I know this as an entrepreneur, it's so easy to get stuck in your own headspace in the work that you're doing, the biz dev that you're doing, that you bring someone in, they're talented, and you're like, oh, you should know how to do this. But it's like, put yourself in their shoes. How the heck are they going to know what to do? They haven't been in your business. They haven't been in your brain for the last however long you've owned this company. They need to have some sort of, guidelines in place that can help them start understanding it. And I think it's just incredibly easy to forget that as an entrepreneur.
It's very true. The other thing we see, Brien, and I'll use Procter & Gamble as an example since you're in Cincinnati, and that is you've got a CPG company, they're selling, sunflower seeds or whatever, and you bring in somebody from Procter & Gamble to be your marketing leader, sales leader, you name it. And you're a five-person shop, and you don't get to sit there and tell people what to do. You have to do it yourself. And somebody comes from Procter & Gamble, they probably got a team of analysts and assistants and operations folks and whatever to support them. And so it's maybe not that they're bad people, it's just that they don't have the resources they're used to. So keep that in mind too when we're bringing them into our sweatshop, because we need them to roll up their sleeves and work hard.
Right. I think especially at the point of hiring someone, it's got to be just crystal clear as to not just the expectations of the job, but the infrastructure that's in place. Because I could see how it'd be. Now, granted, I lasted 6 months in corporate America, so I have very little experience of it. But I could see, to your point, where an executive coming from P&G, they're coming down, they're downsizing to your business. They might think that they're like, oh, this is a bit small. They probably don't have a ton of resources. But you got to be crystal clear as to what your resources actually are. And, it's one of those where everybody kind of, I feel like you get, excited and lost in the adrenaline of a new thing or a new person. And it's really easy to forget, like, oh, hey, by the way, we're a $6 million company. You're coming from a bajillion-dollar company. Like, just want to make that clear.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But they get, oftentimes they're romanticized by, oh man, it's a $6 million company. I can make it a $100 million company and sell it and live on the beach. Or it'd be so fun to help build a brand and, all these things. And those are all true. And it's just a different world.
Yeah, absolutely. There was another archetype chapter in your book, I think it was Resume Ralph. Let's talk about that one. Can you kind of preface that for us?
Yeah, this one is kind of like your P&G guy I just mentioned. And by the way, all of these characters are based on real life characters. So I've got some great stories to share. Now, Resume Ralph has a great looking resume. And just using the example we just had, he comes from P&G. Maybe he worked at Nestle before that, and he looks really, or she looks really good on paper. And you're like, man, you go to your board and you're a struggling sunflower seed company and you need this type of expertise on your team. So you bring in Ralph to come in and give you credibility and do all the great things that he did at Nestle. And, he gets there and realizes that, just like we just talked about, I don't have the team that I'm used to having, and I've got to do these things myself. And he's got a kind of a 9 to 4 schedule, and he goes to make sure he has to get, he's 57, 58, 60 years old. He's got grandkids and he wants to go see them play Little League Baseball. And so he's off the clock at 3 and just all kinds of things like that you see with folks like that just the resume looks good. It's just not a good fit for your early stage company.
Yeah. And is that where, as the entrepreneur, the business owner, you need to be able to pick that out when you're vetting candidates, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me give you 2 things on that. First of all, Brien, is just because you work for a big company doesn't mean you can't do well in a smaller company. So I would ask questions like, tell me about what you did at Nestle. Did you lead a small group that opened up a new office in Brazil, or did you just kind of coast and run with the Hershey's Kisses that have been around for a billion years, or did you launch a new product and have to go through all that and the testing and all the stuff that you would have to do? The other thing about that is I think most entrepreneurs have a optimistic or positive mindset. I'm definitely a glass half full guy. So Brien, it didn't take long before I like you. I want to hire Brien because I like your skill set, your background, we hit it off, whatever. And so I'll find a way to hire you. What I need on my team is somebody that's a little more selective and kind of the opposite. Say, Brien, what exactly are you going to do for us? Or tell me what you did there. And just a better interviewer than I'm going to be. I'm going to sell you in an interview, and I want someone who's really going to get to brass tacks on your capabilities and how you fit into the team on the interview team.
What's a good way for an entrepreneur to avoid that pitfall? I know I am very guilty of that. I've talked to people who are prospectively going to work with me, and whether we had a lot in common or I could tell they're a good person, like my blinders went up and I'm like, oh, this person's great. I've got to bring them in somehow. And it's like, pump the brakes. A week goes by, 2 weeks go by, we have a couple more meetings, and then I'm like, oh, okay, well that, based on what you said, that maybe this actually isn't a great fit. How do you avoid that? Is that where you pull yourself out of it, or do you bring in an outside counsel? Like if you're a 2 or 3 man team, do you bring everybody in? How do you avoid it?
Well, there's a couple of potential opportunities and pitfalls there. I want to. There are some pretty good books about the types of questions you'll ask for candidates. There's a great book by Jeffrey Smart called Who. I have some great tips in my book too, but things that are trying to determine if Brien has the capabilities to do what I want him to do. Now, what I also do for key hires is I lean on my mentors and friends and even a business coach. Say, can you come in and meet this guy? I think he's got it, but I want to make sure that because look, again, I know my blind spots, and that's a blind spot for me. Now, what I don't want to do if I'm bringing in a leader, like somebody who's going to basically be my partner and be my operating partner, I don't want to let my team interview him or her, because it's hard to hire your boss. And if I've got a legacy team that's been coming to me for everything, they've got access to me, and I don't really hold them accountable very well. And if I'm going to bring in Brien, who's an operations badass, who's going to hold them accountable, they're not going to like Brien in the interview process, and they're going to find ways to shoot holes. Frankly, they're going to shoot holes later too, so you've got to be careful with that. So I might let them meet him, but I wouldn't let them interview him or her, if that makes sense.
Okay, gotcha, absolutely. So I kind of want to shift gears to apply some of the things we're learning here to how when you're looking to invest in a business, you've invested in over 200 companies. How do you, I guess, what is your criteria for who you'll invest in or who you'll invest with? And how do these kind of archetypes play into, the business owners that you talk with about possibly investing?
Yeah, so I'm a people person, so I invest in the people, even ahead of the product, honestly, because if I don't think that they have the ability to make it happen, it doesn't matter what their product or idea is. So it's all about the execution. I'm looking for good people. I have invested in a few bad people, and it always goes bad. And it's just when I go against my gut, it just doesn't work well. The biggest lesson I've learned though is if I like somebody a lot, but I can tell there's just not that grit. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you're going to get knocked on your ass every day. And you've got to be able to get back up and fight and just have a positive attitude and just keep fighting. And I've invested in a few folks who just simply don't have that grit. They want a lifestyle, or they want the idea of a successful startup. They aren't invested enough with their time and energy to make it happen. And so that's probably the biggest thing, is just having the grit to endure.
Yeah. Is there a telltale sign from somebody who you're prospectively investing in that you can just tell they don't have that grit? Or is it more of you kind of have to dig deeper and really get their why and understand who they are to figure out if they do actually have that grit? Or is it more so in their backstory as well?
I think it's a great question. I think it's all those things. I want to understand from people that know them, get some background. I want to understand their story, and their why is a big one. And some of the obvious ones are people that need a big salary as a, hey, you're investing in me, but I need to make 200 grand a year because I've got this lifestyle. You can't invest in someone else's lifestyle.
Right. That's a good way to light a stack of cash on fire.
Yep.
How do you assess the products or services? Or I guess I should preface or ask first, what types of businesses do you invest in, or is it all across the spectrum?
Here's our stated premise, and that is we invest in good people that are doing great things. And so if you want to make the world a better place, so to speak, and I think capitalism is a great way to make the world a better place, by the way.
Preach.
But we invest in people we know, so it becomes very, regional or geographically focused. So those are probably the two biggest things, are the people and the geography. I have invested in other things. I've invested in some pretty unique technology that I don't understand, and that's usually through the recommendation of people that I trust.
Okay, interesting. So a little bit across the board, but first and foremost in people. And are you more like more active investors, or is it more of the like, hey, I like you, I like this position, here's our stake, go make it happen? Or does that kind of depend on the business as well?
It depends, and what I've learned is I like to invest small amounts and be a resource for people. I've found that when I have to get more involved, we're probably in trouble because I'm not an operator. I'm a connector, so I can connect you to solutions, but I'm not an operator. And so if I'm more involved, it just means the business is in trouble. So I like to be aware and a resource, and I spend a lot of time with folks, but I don't want to be needed, if that makes sense.
Right, absolutely. If your goal is to not be needed, and the minute somebody needs you, that spells trouble for sure.
Well, I'll be there. I mean, that's the thing. I'll be there, but there's people better than me at whatever your problem is. I can promise you that.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to investing, is there, I guess, let's say you have the right type of business, the right type of investor. Do you fully vet like their team? Kind of getting back to the book, do you have to like do this incredibly deep dive where it's like, hey, I need to know that all 18 people on your staff are the right people in the right seats doing the right thing? How does that work for you?
I don't generally go that deep, and part of it is if I have a belief in the founder, then I don't need to know the details, if that makes sense. And I'm generally investing as an angel, so that's kind of just a belief in the founder. If we're doing bigger amounts, which we have done, we want to do much more due diligence, and it's not where I want to play as much. I don't want to be a private equity investor. I want to be an angel investor.
Right. And this is going to be my own ignorance, but I guess the technical term of angel investing, are you meeting people at the beginning of their journey with their business, or is this more so, or a mix of some businesses are 3 years in and they need another series?
Yeah, generally it's the earlier stage. So just for your listeners, the early rounds are usually called angel rounds because it's just people coming from heaven that are just believing whatever, fairy dust. Even before that, the first angels are usually friends and family. So you'll hear that terms a lot. It's a friends and family round. Brien, you're my brother or you're my friend. And then angels will come in the early stage. And then as you grow and become more mature as an organization, you're going to raise larger amounts of money. And that's where you would go to more private equity or venture capitalists. And those rounds are called Series A, Series B type of things. We've been involved in several of those. And as an angel investor, you're usually going to have an opportunity / you have to reinvest because there's going to be multiple rounds.
Gotcha.
So it's not for the faint of heart. And don't just invest in one or two and think you're going to hit a lottery ticket. You need to invest in 10 or 20.
Right. Have you, maybe this might be a silly question, but are there businesses you've invested in that have not panned out? And if so, what were there things that you discovered afterwards where you're like, I should have picked up on that? Or is it just, not every business works, right? Like the majority of businesses fail. That's investing, right? Some things work, some things don't. But from the ones that may not have worked, what's the biggest lessons you pulled from it?
Well, the answer to your first question is abso-freaking-lutely yes. Businesses don't work out. Anybody who claims that they hit on all their, bets are full of shit, right?
Yeah.
So let's say out of 20, there's probably 2 or 3 or 4 that hit, hopefully, one hits big, and we've been fortunate that a couple have hit big, but we've had a lot of dogs too. So common traits. Sometimes you just can't tell. Like I invested in a direct-to-consumer boot company a few years ago, kind of sight unseen, and it was probably the dumbest investment ever. But that turned out to be Tecovas Boots, which is doing $400 million or whatever in revenue. So great story. And I've invested in other ones. You think, oh my gosh, this is a no-brainer. It's going to be a big win, and it didn't happen. So there's always that factor. But whenever I've invested in people that I could tell a person just wasn't a good person, mistake. I also invested in a really delicious peanut butter company that was amazing. I found out later that they didn't even own their recipe. Their co-packer owned the recipe. So, could I have caught that? Should I have caught that? Probably.
Yeah. It's going to be a mixed bag when you invest. I always kind of like to hear the ones that didn't quite work out and see what were the reasons behind it, because there's a million and one why a business might fail.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about, we're all about abundance here at MU. So the Unlocking Moves podcast, who are the types of folks that come on the show, or the types of topics that you guys cover? I want to make sure our folks are able to tune into yours as well.
Yeah, we're mainly looking for really interesting stories, and we're trying to encourage and inspire really the next generation of entrepreneurs. So very similar to what you're doing. One of the episodes is my favorite. You and I talked about earlier is the founders of Poppy. It's Stephen and Allison Ellsworth. I actually know them because I coached their 7-year-old in baseball.
How
and
cool.
By the way, my youngest is 18 now, so I don't have a kid on the team. But they have a great story. I don't know if I can share how much revenue that they have done, but they are the #1 growing soft drink brand ever.
Yep.
And they started 5 or 7 years ago selling apple cider vinegar drinks. And that's still what they do, but they just do it very well. So they have a couple of unlocking moves. They were first, would sell their product at a farmer's market, and they were discovered by a Whole Foods buyer at a farmer's market. And I said, hey, kudos to you for being at a farmer's market, because many people would just hope that someone would find them. Number two, they took a leap and applied to get on Shark Tank, and it was a big win for them. They got funded on Shark Tank, which was big. And just several things like that people would say, oh, you're so lucky. But the reality is they sought out their opportunities and they seized them. I had a guy, one of my first guests was an editor for Inc. magazine and I think Fortune magazine. His name is Rod Kurtz, and he's a friend. But we talked about his unlocking move. He was a struggling journalist, and he wanted to get Richard Branson to do a story with him. And he reached out to Richard Branson, and Richard Branson said no. And he reached out to Richard, or his team said no, right? Reached out the next day, no. Next day, no. Like for 2 months, he tried reaching out in various emails, texts, sales, whatever. He kept saying no. And finally they said, "It, okay, let's go, let's do it." And he did a story, and they became fast friends. And then, a month later, he's flying on his plane doing stories, to freaking Necker Island down in the BVI's. So
Wow.
my point is that we all have opportunities to reach out to Richard Branson, but rarely do we do it. We all have opportunities to get on Brian's podcast and become a celebrity overnight, but we don't do it. We all do. We all have those opportunities. We don't usually seize the day.
Yeah.
So carpe diem.
Very cool. I love that. And yeah, that was my favorite episode of yours, was the Poppy brand. Very much so because I'm partial to it. My wife brought home a can of Poppy soda probably earlier this year, and now it's on the front shelves at our Kroger here in Cincy. And that stuff is delicious. And I'm a water drinker, but I usually put the water enhancer, or sometimes I'll cut up a cucumber and put it in there when I'm feeling fancy, because I hate just plain water. But she brings home this Poppy soda, and I'm like, dang it, this is delicious. And I'm a sucker for anything orange, so the orange one's my favorite. So yeah, that was a really cool episode for sure.
Thanks, man. It's one of my favorite. They're just such a fun personality, and we just had a good time.
Awesome. Well, I might have to get them on the show here.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, Kurt, we're bumping up against time here. This has been awesome. I think there's just a gold mine of knowledge that you shared with everyone here today. I want to make sure I invite all our listeners to reach out to you, to check out your book. If they have questions or want to connect, what's the best way to get a hold of Kurt Wilkin and get a hold of your book?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm on LinkedIn, Kurt Wilkin. It's KurtWilkin. And then the book is called Who's Your Mike. You can go to that website, who'syourmike.com, or check it out on Amazon. Be careful, don't type in Who's Your Daddy. It's a different book than Who's Your Mike. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's Who's Your Mike, Mike. All right, awesome. Well, Kurt, thank you so much, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. Can't wait to chat with you again soon.
All right, Brian, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
All right.